Okay, well, welcome to the third and last meeting of this mini course. I have to say I am enjoying a lot discussing this stuff with you. I imagine that some of the things that we covered are quite new for you, but I also perceived that you are with me on most of the topics that we have covered, and that's certainly good news, because there is nothing as bad as teaching to people who either do not understand you, which happens, or that are not interested in what you're saying. The psychological effect of that is that you find boring the thing that you are saying. There is a sort of dictatorship of the audience. If the audience thinks that what you are saying is boring, ipso facto, you find it boring. So I'm glad that this did not happen here. Okay, let me quickly remind you of where we are and where we hope to be heading today. In the first class, remember, we distinguished these three main orientations. We saw why, on my account at least, each of them has serious shortfalls as a foundation of human rights. And even the school that I belong to any extent, the Orthodox one, seems to be unable to do much more than simply pointing to the unavoidable role that the concept of human dignity should role in any foundation of human rights. What I think is a common feature of all the three orientations that we have studied is the careful avoidance of point that seems to be quite central in the culture of human rights as it was presented by the founding fathers, so to speak, by the drafters of the official documents. I call this the forgotten alternative, which in a nutshell is more or less the following. None of the schools of the orientations that we have studied seems to take very seriously the idea, which is very central in the culture of human rights, that human beings, for some reason, need to be explained and spelled out, are worthy creatures. So, why is the Holocaust bad? Well, because the Holocaust was not about insects, but it was about human beings. Why is that bad? Well, because human beings are worthy creatures. There is something that makes them worthy of a special attention and of protection. So, I call this the esteem dimension. So the idea that you won't be able to make sense of human rights unless you take very seriously the idea that behind the culture of human rights there is this important intuition that human beings have something special about themselves, which ipso facto dictates a certain kind of treatment and forbids other kinds of treatments. So, seems to me that this idea of trying to regain this sort of Renaissance intuition that goes back at least to Piero della Mirandola about the, the special status of human beings and intrinsically worthy status that human beings possess, needs to be reclaimed if we want to yield a satisfactory foundation. Of course, as I've said too many times probably in this course, the reason why none of the excellent philosophers who have attempted to provide a philosophical foundation of human rights have followed this path is that by the moment you try to take this idea seriously and you try to do something more than the current Orthodox does, there is human dignity, you have to dig into very shaky and uncertain terrain, which is the terrain of metaphysics, of moral theory, traditionally understood, which seems to run against another central idea behind the culture of human rights, that is their pretense, their claim to universality. Okay, so the game, the philosophical game I set for myself is precisely to try to, steer clear from the Sheila of the forgetfulness about the special character of human beings and the Cariddi of the need to stay on a path that can be tentatively shared at the universal level so that everybody can agree with. So the difficulty is precisely to do something more than the orthodox currently do, that is to say something more specific about human dignity, but to say that without generating divisions, without giving what it's called, with a technical expression, a parochial account of human dignity. That is an account that is okay for my church, for my group, for my culture, but it's not okay for other churches, other groups, other cultures. Okay, so how does that work? What I hope to be able to do today is to lead you through the third chapter of my book, I'm going to skip the discussion I have in this chapter about Rosen, Kateb, and Waldron, partly because we have already discussed Waldron. The text I discuss in this chapter is not the one you read yesterday, is rather the book I was mentioning, the 2012 book, where he introduces this idea of dignity as a status, as a rank, and partly because the discussion I have of Kateb and Rosen are simply meant to show that my account of dignity is significantly different, maybe worse, maybe better, but certainly different than the ones that you find in the literature today. Incidentally, I have to say I did not discuss here perhaps the most important book about Kant's notion of dignity recently appeared. That is the one by Oliver Sensen. I think he wrote this book in 2012 as well. The reason being that important as they may be for the Kantian scholarship, his account of Kant's dignity does not change much of the picture that I'm trying to convey. But I wanted to signal the fact that if you want to know more about Kant's specific notion of human dignity, besides my book, you should look at Sensen's book. Okay? So that's the plan. I mean, that's the articulation of the argument. I give a fairly detailed account of the argument in section 1, where I acknowledge the Kantian roots of my approach. Then I will show why this approach is Kantian but not Kant's. That is, there are two main differences between what Kant would say about human dignity and what I am ready and willing to say. Then we will move to draw a distinction, this one quite important, between my account based on autonomy, as we will see, and the account put forward by James Griffin. Remember, James Griffin is the guy who talks about agency, is the first instrumentalist that we discussed. For him, human rights can be grounded in the fact that they protect the possibility for agency. Since we all are agents or interested in staying agents, it follows that we all have to acknowledge the importance and normative force of human rights. It is important, as I will show, to distinguish this approach from mine, which makes a reference, a crucial reference to our autonomy, so our ability to be autonomous, because I believe that what Griffin does is to produce an instrumentalist account, which is, since we are interested in agency, it follows that we have to also be interested in the preconditions that allow us to remain and be agents. This is an argument that starts from an interest that we have. My argument, more, I think, closer to Kant here, is not about an interest that we have in our autonomy, assuming that we are autonomous. My argument goes more or less as follows. Since we are autonomous, this ipso facto gives us a status, independently of whether we are interested in our autonomy or not. It is what we are, which dictates by itself a certain kind of treatment to which we are entitled. So one of the things that I do in the chapter is to signal the fact that I am not giving another account similar to the one given by Griffin, which may appear with a Kantian flavor, because of course this idea of agency, or as he sometimes called it, personhood, reminds of the idea of rational nature, the ability of setting for yourself ends, which is a notion of freedom which also Kant has, but has to be clearly distinguished from the notion of autonomy that relates to a higher degree of freedom, that is the freedom to follow the moral law. Unfortunately, I make this distinction in detail in chapter 1, where I discuss Kant's theory of innate rights, but I will try to set the terms of the distinction clear also during today's discussion. Okay, I like to introduce my approach with a reference to the great Pico della Mirandola, of which I'm sure you have already heard, but it's extremely fascinating to see how in his famous De Oratio Dignitate, how is it? Dignitate hominis, yes. So a speech about the dignity of man, it basically introduces this idea of human beings as entities worthy of esteem, and the reason that he gives for this esteem is very similar, though not identical, to the one I want to defend. So let's see what Pico says. So in the Oration on Dignity of Man, the manifesto of the Italian Renaissance, there is no national pride here. It's just a coincidence that Pico was Italian. And one of the most fundamental texts ever written on the worth of our species, Pico della Mirandola famously makes the point that he has this beautiful metaphor that God, having decided to create man to have someone who could contemplate the splendor of his creation, faces a shortage of material, which is, I would say, quite surprising for the Almighty. And so God, says Pico, had no archetype from which to fashion some new child, nor could he find in his vast treasures house anything he could give to his new son. So the idea is that he ran out of material. God, when was creating the world, at one point ran out of the material through which he was creating the world. But at the same time, he wanted to have a creature capable of contemplating the beauty and splendor of what he had already done. So the challenge for him was to create some new creature without material, basically. Of course, God was not impressed by this difficulty, and he turned an obstacle into an opportunity. The shapelessness of our new creature would become the center of its world. God chose to give humans the very power to determine themselves to whatever they would decide to be. And so God spoke. Adam, we give you no fixed place to live, no form that is peculiar to you, nor any function that is yours alone. According to your desires and judgment, you will have and possess whatever place to live, whatever form, and whatever functions you yourself choose. All other things have a limited and fixed nature, prescribed and bounded by our laws. You, with no limit or bound, may choose for yourself the limits and bounds of your nature. We have placed you at the world's center so that you may survey everything else in the world. We have made you neither of heavenly nor of earthly stuff, neither mortal nor immortal, so that with free choice and dignity you may fashion yourself into whatever form you choose. To you is granted the power of degrading yourself into the lower forms of life, the beast, and to you is granted the power contained in your intellect and judgment to be reborn into the higher forms, the divine. So, one of the many things you can notice about this passage, which is a very famous one, and I would say the manifesto of what it, the turning of the cultural mood from the Middle Age to the Renaissance. I mean, after all, we are not, just puppets in the hands of God, and we are not that bad either. One of the things that attracts my attention most is that Pico does not say, like Kant would say later, that we have dignity when we choose to turn ourselves into the higher forms, that is, when we choose to be moral, Kant would say. He says that the source of our worth lies in our capacity to turn ourselves into whatever we decide to become. So it seems an appeal to freedom per se, not a specific form of freedom that allows us to follow the moral law. So this radical freedom to become beasts or quasi-divine entities, this seems to be the ground of our dignity, according to Pico. So this itself, in my opinion at least, is a great breach with the medieval tradition, because of course, if you look at St. Thomas, the picture is quite different. If we have any worth, if we have any dignity, if we have any value, this has to do with the place that God pre-fixed, pre-chose for us. In the scheme of things, in nature, we have a well-defined role and place, and our value depends on that. With Pico, the appeal is to the absence of a place, the absence of a prefixed role, the absence of a role that one is predetermined up to a point to play in nature. So we have, up to what point is Pico really appealing to this notion of radical freedom as opposed to something closer to the Kantian notion of autonomy, that is freedom understood as the ability to follow the moral law in any circumstance. Well, Pico does not say, as I will do, as Kant does, as I will do, that our worth lies in the permanent, incorruptible ability to choose the moral law, in our autonomy understood in the sense we have been explaining. Pico seems to praise more our ability to constitute ourselves in whatever forms of being we choose. Still, it seems to me, Pico comes close enough to our understanding, because on the one hand, he opens the path for a foundation that no longer rests on the ontological place occupied by humans in a pre-given fixed structure of the universe, but, as I said, on a capacity that grants us the freedom to pick that plays. On the other hand, no matter how much he insists on our amoral freedom, on this radical freedom, it is evident that he himself believes that our value ultimately rests on our ability to choose the divine in us. If our dignity rested on the possibility to choose which specific beast we want to become, his argument that we occupy a special place in the universe would hardly be convincing. So, my impression is that on the one hand, he does not want to say our value depends on our ability to choose the divine, as he says. On the other hand, he tends toward that conclusion because it would be hard to make sense of this point if we only had the freedom to pick the specific beast we want to become in nature, as opposed to, we could become a beast, but we still have always the possibility to turn ourselves towards the source of value, of course, which is something different. So the capacity to stretch towards the divine, to use Pico's emphatic expression, is the ground of human dignity, and human dignity is the foundation of human right. And this could be the slogan of the approach that I defend. So let's try to give a slightly more detailed and articulated expression of this point. Well, I want to say that the capacity to act on self-imposed moral constraints, possibly, as I said with the example, remember, of the person threatened to give false testimony against the innocent man, possibly to the detriment of our strongest inclinations, is the source of the value and respect we owe to all human beings. So we see ourselves and other people as always capable of following the moral law, what is right, what is obligatory, independently of how costly that is. And I think this is, I don't take myself to be introducing a new idea in the history of philosophy here, because that's also Kant's idea, no difference here. I take this to be the center of our dignity and of our value. So in this sense, autonomy, which before I had distinguished from practical freedom, which is the lower kind of freedom that Kant introduces, so the ability to do whatever you want, basically. Autonomy is not that, is more specifically the ability not only to follow with a degree of freedom the impulse that comes from your senses, realizing your inclination in the way that you decide is best fit, which would be practical freedom, but is the ability to act in full independence of any sensible impulse, which is something more. I mean, presupposes that we find, as Kant says, an interest, a pure interest, in the moral law itself, and that therefore we are capable of being motivated by something that has nothing to do with our inclinations. So that's what's beautiful about autonomy, if we are autonomous, of course. So the individuals that belong to the human species, including those that have that capacity impaired temporarily or permanently by fortuitous circumstances, have the peculiarity to being able to put aside the self-serving interest in the name of what they consider obligatory. This captures one of the senses in which dignity has been traditionally used, namely this is one of the senses that also Waldron and Rosen distinguishes. So dignity understood as the ability to endure circumstances that challenge our sensuous nature. So, this idea, this heroistic picture of the dignitary person who is sort of stoic hero that endures circumstances, unfavorable circumstances. And this is also why Kant describes human's worth in terms of dignity as opposed to other praise attributing terms such as excellence, skill, goodness, and why things that we owe reverence or respect, not accidentally called Achtung, to humans as opposed to deference or sympathy and the like. So the notion of autonomy, it is important to understand this, is quite specific and should not be conflated with the simple capacity to set freely one's end and pursue one's goals, which is more or less what Griffin calls agency or personhood. If by that is meant the ability to choose effective means for one's ends. The distinction between the common sense notion of autonomy, that is self-determination, and the one at work here, capacity for moral agency. So if you ask the famous man of the street and you say, what it means that you are autonomous? Well, I do whatever I want. I am self-determining, so nobody is going to tell me what to do. And that's what it means to be autonomous. Well, no, that's not the sense of autonomy that we operate with. And it's important to keep the distinction very clear. Why is that important? Well, because we are not just after the future of human beings that makes us different than other species. That's an important point. It is possible that we enjoy a degree of distance from our impulses and inclination higher than those reserved to other mammals or lower animals or the like. I mean, humans basically are creatures that even if they are very thirsty, if they have a higher interest, that is, they are very interested in what they are hearing, they don't want to be unpolite by, leaving a room when someone else is speaking, what have you. I mean, they can delay the satisfaction of that impulse because they have this capacity to take certain distance from their inclinations. The problem with this kind of capacity is that it doesn't confer on us any special value, like intelligence or physical strength. It seems that we are not only looking for something that is specific of our species, but we are also looking for a feature that is both specific of our species, that is peculiar to us, but also that in itself contains value. So why should the sheer possession of a capacity ground any worth? For example, the fact that humans have a special capacity hardly grounds any special protection. For example, Howards is probably the only species that kills for sheer amusement. Cats may be another example, or for cold, long-term calculation of interest. So only humans are capable of killing for, humans and cats, let's say, are capable of killing for sheer amusement. But of course we would not infer from the peculiarity of this skill any worth for our species, right? So that's what I mean when I say that we are looking after a feature that is both peculiar to us but also intrinsically valuable. And why are things different with autonomy, right? Why is autonomy fitting both this condition that on the one hand it's peculiar to us? Why is it important that it's peculiar to us? Well, because we say that human beings have human rights, not cats, dogs, monkeys, and so on. Maybe we are wrong, but that's what we do basically. So if we want to ground human rights, we have to find something that we have and other species do not have. Otherwise we would be saying that human rights have to be extended to, I don't know, the whole mammal world or what have you. So the feature, autonomy, is not only peculiar to or most developed in the human species, it also has an intrinsic value, as it shows humans as capable of behavior that we assume exacts respect. We are not merely self-masters, but also, and more significantly, potentially righteous ones. It's not sufficient to be free. You have to be free in the right way if you want to have a claim to intrinsic value for yourself. We are not merely free, we are free to choose a path of integrity and mutual respect. And precisely because we have this capacity, precisely because morality is within our reach, it is always possible to say, no thank you dictator, I'm not going to give false testimony against the innocent man. It is because of that capacity that we are entitled to an amount of respect that is basically unfettered by circumstances. So remember, another desideratum, maybe I should have put that more in a more orderly fashion, but another desideratum of this account is that this feature that we are after has to do two extra things. One, it has to remain there even in the worst of us. So, we say that killing Saddam Hussein was a violation of human rights, although it was a bad guy, obviously. Why do we say that? On my account, there is space for claiming something like that. Well, because even Saddam Hussein still had the capacity for moral behavior. So, this feature has to be quite independent of the things that people are doing as a matter of fact with their lives. Otherwise, we end up saying that we can treat in a degrading way criminals, which is again something that we all immediately say it's a violation of human rights. Why? Because we are attacking their dignity. We are not just putting them in prison. We are offending their dignity, which is something different, right? So it has to be, this feature has to remain there even if you have done the worst things possible with your life. And two, it has to be impressive enough that you still have reason to treat the worst among us with a certain degree of respect.
Luigi,
yes.
Is it only the potential or
yes.
the capacity? Because children and a man who is in prison, for instance, he has no capacity to put his hand on the...
Sorry, those in prison, you said?
Yes.
Oh, no. Well, children, you may say, are not autonomous in the sense that if they haven't developed their rational capacity yet, mm-hmm. They are not as autonomous as adult. But that's not a very difficult case, because if you are protecting the potential in human adults to be moral, and you have entities that are about to become adults, mm-hmm. that is to develop this capacity to be moral, of course you have all the reasons to protect also the entities that have mm-hmm. this capacity at the second level, right? Mm-hmm. So you protect children because they are about to become those entities that fully have this capacity for autonomy. Mm-hmm. The people in prison is no problem at all. I mean, mm-hmm. they remain autonomous. Remember, the problem with agency was that if you focus on agency and you say that being an agent is what human rights are supposed to protect, you end up with the difficulty of saying that the human rights of a slave are not violated, because a slave remains a purposive agent, remains someone who makes decisions about his life. Of course, his freedom, external freedom, is limited, but that doesn't mean that he cannot decide to move this arm first, that other arm first, to do the job that he's told to do in a way rather than in another. So this already makes him a purposive agent. Besides, he remains an autonomous person, because of course, autonomy is not external freedom. Maybe this is another distinction that has to be made clear. being autonomous is something that even a slave can perfectly do, even someone who is, you know, literally within a cage. It's really the ability to follow the moral law and the external circumstances in which you find yourself is not going to impact on that capacity. Okay?
I have the same question because when we talked about agency,
Yes.
we consider that children, slaves, and also people who are in common
In common, yeah.
are not potential agents. Are not potential agents.
Mhm.
What about autonomy? Doesn't this fall into the same problem?
It does, and that's a very good question. I mean, my account, I think, does not have too big of a problem with children for the reason that I've given to Virginia. That is, it is possible to say that children, a little bit like animals, are not autonomous because they do pretty much what they want to do, as we know. They just follow inclinations. But we know that they are developing this capacity for, balancing their inclinations against a higher law that is given to them by reason. So the experience of moral constraints is about to come in their life. And so if we think that this is a feature that makes us special, we also have reason to think that children are special because they are developing that capacity. Okay, so the usual problem that is thrown against Kantian ethics, if you focus on rational nature, then you are saying that children are not covered by this, was never very impressive to me, because I think there are easy way to overcome that objection. A more difficult case is with people who are not temporarily, I think that I made a mistake in what I read, but permanently impaired. So people in coma that will not recover, that we know that, or at least that, have a diminution of their mental capacity that is not going to change. So at that point, of course, there is no way of saying that these people are autonomous because they lack rational capacities, which is a presupposition. It's a necessary condition, not a sufficient condition for being autonomous, but certainly a necessary condition. If they lose their rational capacities, there is no way that they remain autonomous agents. So what do we do in that case? Are we bound to the conclusion that people without full mental capacities in a permanent state of coma, for example, do not have human rights? Okay, that's a difficult question, and I try to address that later on in the chapter. But the main intuition there is twofold. On the one hand, you may go in the direction of saying, well, this guy, before he entered the coma, had a network of relationships that, in virtue of the fact that he was one of us, so to speak, was in the family of the autonomous people, was worthy of respect. In addition, he built a network of relationships, and therefore he is still entitled to a certain degree of protection because of what he was. Okay, that's one way you could go. The other way you could go is to bite the bullet, as people say, and say, actually, a human being who has turned into a status of coma is no longer what he used to be, and therefore is no longer entitled to all the protection that he used to have.
Then again, that's a statement that you feel like a violation of human rights.
Sorry, say it again?
It's a statement, if you say that,
Yes.
it feels like a violation of human rights.
Yeah, no, that's why it's biting the bullet. I'm saying that probably there is nothing intrinsically wrong with the idea that people in coma are still entitled to avoidance of pain if they still have the sensible capacity to feel pain. We say that it's not okay from a moral point of view to inflict unnecessary pain to animals. We think this is just an act of cruelty. But at the same time that they no longer have all the protections that human beings have. So again, these are two alternative ways. I don't think they are incompatible with one another. You could say, well, I'm going not longer to attribute all human rights that this guy used to have because he's no longer as human as he used to be. But at the same time, I'm protecting the web of relationship that had with other autonomous people, and therefore he's entitled to more protection than what an animal is entitled to. So it's not just about avoidance of pain, it's about a way of treating his body, a way of deciding whether his life has to come to end, in what way. So I think that even starting from autonomy, you still have some room to accommodate our moral intuition on what we are entitled to do with people in coma, but also what we are entitled to do because they are no longer what they used to be. I think this is very different from the case of the slave and agency, right? Because there, you simply show that there is a conceptual mistake at the very beginning of the argument, because of course you want to keep the slave in the category of those who have human rights, but by starting with agency, and since the slave remains a purposive agent, you are led to the conclusion that the slave's rights are not violated. That in that condition of slavery, that person does not have his or her human rights violated. So I think it's different.
Professor?
Yes?
Question. About the version, the fetus, because
Yeah.
it seems to me that the fetus has the possibility or potential future to become an autonomous person.
So I would be led to say that abortion is always wrong. That's what you're saying. Of course, that's a good point. I mean, that though calls into question what are your decisions about the beginning of the human life. I mean, even if you keep this intuition that you have to protect the potential, the point remains the potential of what? Because otherwise, why not going a step forward, backwards, and saying, oh, okay, if we are protecting a potential for autonomy, then we should also make sure that when people have sex, they have the maximum probability to give birth. So I see where you're going, that is, if you focus on a potential, you may end up with the conclusion that ipso facto abortion is wrong, because after all the fetus has a potential to become an autonomous person. Fine, but I think this discussion is parasitic on a different philosophical discussion in which you at one point have to decide what constitutes a human person. That is when that person is born, independently of the natural background that comes with it. So I think I'm not committed to either of the two positions on abortion is always wrong or not, because I think that here what you need is a philosophical argument that allows you to say the fetus is to be protected the moment in which an ovulus meets a spermatozoa, or at birth, or after the 3rd month. I don't think that, for the sheer fact that I'm focusing on a potential, I have to take a stance on when human life, the life of a human person, I would say, not of a human being in general, but a human person begins. Okay, so, I'm trying to defend myself by saying, even if you take this path, this philosophical perspective, you are neither in a better nor in a worse position to answer the kind of question that seems to be crucial regarding abortion, that is when is the human person born. As you know, the law does not say, most of the case, the law does not say that the fetus has all the rights that has a person that was born. So here, the law itself, quite independent of the distinction of the position that each legal system has on abortion, makes a distinction between rights to be attributed to the fetus and rights to be attributed to the child that is actually born. So, I guess that, again, my focusing on a potential doesn't make the life, my life, or the life of philosophy more difficult or easier in trying to answer the set of questions that are crucial for the question of abortion. Okay, good. So, why is this foundation a Kantian foundation but not Kant's? Since we ground human dignity and as a consequence human rights in the Kantian notion of autonomy, it is natural to grow the impression that what we are doing here is simply a rehearsal of Kant's doctrine. At best, we would be applying Kant's explanation of human dignity to the contemporary debate. But, we promised, and it's good to give an approach that is inspired by Kant as opposed to cut and COVID from him. So where is the difference? I think that these two main points mark the distance between my approach and Kant's. On the one hand, I assume that authentic moral behavior does not occur only when the agent acts under the constraints of one of the formulas of the categorical imperative. So, formula of humanity, universal law, universalization principle, or whatever. Not only when one has in mind one of these formulas, but also when agency is inspired by other moral principles that would also be substantially different than the categorical imperative. That is, to give you different normative guidelines. So, I think the substance here is not that important up to a point, and that's a weakness of mine. I will tell you why. But I want to stick to the idea that also when agency is inspired by other moral principles, as long as they conform to broadly accepted constraints of the kind implicit in the golden rule. So just to give an example, I'm not saying that only the golden rule in addition to the category imperative is okay. But even in this case, I think that people are autonomous. Okay? That's the first distinction that I make. The second one is that I deny that moral behavior is, strictly speaking, a prerogative of human beings. I hold that bits of behaviors that fit most of the features we usually attribute to human moral agency, so consideration for the well-being of other members of the species, readiness to sacrifice, and so on, take place also among primates and other mammals. So, what I want to say is the weaker thesis, I want to make the weaker thesis that human beings are autonomous to a higher degree than, lower species, as opposed to say that we are, strictly speaking, the only autonomous species on Earth. Which I think is enough for our purposes. It's enough for attributing more rights to human beings than to other animals. Okay, so let's start with the first point of departure. We have been saying that our peculiar ability to act on moral imperative grounds human worth and dignity. We also specify that these moral imperatives have to be categorical in kind. It doesn't have to conform to the categorical imperative, but the kind of obligations have to be categorical. That is, the agency I'm interested in, you have to be able to follow a moral rule independently of the specific content of the moral rule, independently of your sensuous inclinations. So even the golden rule can call you to put aside your sensual inclinations, because, I mean, I would like to steal this stuff. Would you be happy if, you know, everybody would steal your stuff? No. And therefore you have to, you know, constrain yourself. Okay, I'm not going to steal that thing because I would not like others to do the same to me. So this being categorical in kind is really an appeal to the fact that they have to take into no considerations your inclinations. You have to be able to act with no consideration of your inclination, independently of the content of the moral rule that you are following. So only if humans are seen as capable of overcoming all natural impulses, thereby making no concession to their sensuous natures, can we reasonably speak of a peculiar worth that entitles them to special protection compared to the rest of the animal world. This doesn't mean that we hold that moral agency needs to take place through a conscious adoption of one of the formulas of the categorical imperative. We rather assume that humans are conscious of moral constraints, with some version of the moral law serving as the guiding rule for practical deliberation. And finally, we assume that this moral law is close enough. Well, I changed my mind about this. I mean, when I wrote this, I thought that the golden rule was pretty much the best example and the only example one could give in addition to the categorical imperative. I no longer think that I have become more extreme, and I will tell you why in a moment. Because I really think that any moral constraints that you have, really independently of the substance, shows your autonomy and therefore calls for respect by other people. So just to jump a little bit ahead, I'm ready to say that the Nazi official who decided to sacrifice himself to remain faithful to Hitler in Berlin when the Allies were about to enter the bunker and stuff like that, is displaying autonomy. So I know that could be counterintuitive, but I think that all I'm trying to say is that I am interested in this capacity to act on principles with pretty much no considerations on the quality of the principle itself. When I wrote this book, I wasn't prepared to say that, maybe for good reasons. Now I have become a little bit more radical on that. So, in fact, you will see later that I'm trying to say, okay, that we need to have some limits to the scope of what the moral law has to, can look like. Right now, and thanks to the criticism that I received by actually Brazilian scholars of this book, I think I'm ready now to go all the way and to say that again, the quality, the intrinsic quality of the principle that you're following is quite irrelevant if you focus on your capacity to put aside egoistic drives, sensuous drives, inclinations, for the sake of some higher goal, some higher cause, let's say, quite independently of the quality of the cause. But, I mean, it is extreme, but think about it. It's not that counterintuitive. I mean, we pay homage to our enemies if we see that they really fight for what they believe in. Even the worst enemies. I mean, we pay homage to their ability to sacrifice themselves for a cause that you may find obnoxious or horrific. I think it's extreme, but maybe not that extreme. Of course, why is this not Kant's theory? Well, I mean, that's for you guys who have studied philosophy. Remember, this book is written with this crazy ambition of speaking also to people who do not know much about philosophy. So I consciously decided to write a book that was open to the famous erudite reader, which not necessarily is very sophisticated in the history of philosophy, but is someone who can understand a complex argument. I have to explain also things that you know, of course, by heart. So for Kant this would be crazy because these are bits of noter. Well, for Kant it would be crazy because, of course, the moral law has to take the form of one of the formulas of the categorical imperative. The golden rule is not. Well, what's wrong with the golden rule? I mean, the golden rule may lead you to strange results because, of course, the idea is that you don't want others to do you don't want to do things that you don't want others to do onto you. Now, this seems to depend on basically self-love. So I'm not going to hurt you because I don't want you to be able to hurt me. So it all starts from a preoccupation with my well-being, basically, and it's on the basis of this preoccupation that I have moral constraints. I think that Kant would say this is non-autonomous, it's heteronomous behavior. And I think that there is room for saying that. But again, I'm looking for something that I'm suggesting that human beings are worthy creatures merely for the fact of being able to act on principles. So, okay, could be self-love what ultimately motivates you in avoiding hurting other people, but of course the golden rule becomes constrained the moment in which you want to hurt other people. So it really depends on how you read the golden rule. Of course, the golden rule is the moral law that we tell our children, right? Would you like other people to do that to you? But we do that when they are about doing or they just did something that was morally wrong. So I'm trying to say that also the golden rule can be categorical in kind. So if you follow the golden rule and you are tempted to steal something from someone else, and you pass the test of the golden rule, this action that you are about to perform, you stop by saying, no, I would not like other people to be able to steal from me. Now, you can read that as an act of self-love, but there is room to read that very differently as an act that sets limit to your interest right now, for the sake of a higher principle that you respect, because in general you don't want people to be able to do things to each other. So this remains within the categorical domain. Even if ultimately it's self-love that motivates the golden rule, in the specific circumstances in which you apply the golden rule to constrain yourself from, doing immoral things, there you are doing a categorical act. You are under a categorical obligation, because in that moment your self-love is leading you to the immoral thing. So, again, Kant would not agree with this benevolent reading of the obligatory nature of the golden rule, but I think that there is room for saying that even if you appeal to the golden rule in your behavior, you are still autonomous and not necessarily heteronomous. Okay, so it is natural to infer from that he would not be ready to attribute, Kant would not be ready to attribute any moral value to behavior that is inspired by principle other than the categorical imperative. More importantly, he would reject the idea that humans express their capacity for moral agency even when they act on principle other than the categorical imperative. I don't think that we need to follow this path. People may act on authentic conception of duty even when they endorse a principle like the golden rule, and I would submit that even clear cases of heteronomous moral theory can express the same central capacity for moral agency we are appealing to. For example, one may believe that morality's sourcing is in God and still adhere to divine commands, not out of fear of divine punishment or similarly heteronomous motives, but because one endorses those commands and makes them truly one's own. If this process of endorsement is carried out, one no longer obeys an external command, but acts from a self-imposed moral constraint. And these bits of agency from duty should, in our opinion, count as a legitimate expression of the autonomous faculty on which our worth rests. Now, here is the moderate version of this idea that I am abandoning right now. There are, of course, limits to the freedom we are given to pick a specific formulation of the moral law. It would be absurd to construe as instances of autonomous agency Nazi officials' steady commitment to die in the Berlin bunker with Hitler. But alas, the moment we affirm that not all formulations of the moral law reveal our autonomy, we need to draw some lines. Fortunately, we don't start from zero in this enterprise. It is common knowledge that the golden rule, do unto others as you would wish them to do unto you, is echoed in all major religious traditions of the world. Not accidentally, its iconic representation in the mosaic by Norman Rockwell in the UN General Assembly has become one of the symbols of the United Nations. Its cross-cultural validity makes it fit for the task, albeit imperfect, open to considerable variance in dependence of the normative context in which it is inserted, and vulnerable to distortions, thinks of its compatibility with an ethics based on the reciprocal permissibility of violence, because the problem with the golden rule is not so much that it's based on self-love, it's that it licenses even mob ethics. So imagine that you say, it's okay that other people, if they are more powerful than me, they come and kill me and get me out of the game. Because that's exactly what I would do to them, and that's okay with me. So violence as a way of, solving our controversies, expression of power is okay. I mean, that's what I call the mob's ethics. And that seems to be compatible with the golden rule, because, you are doing to others what you would be ready to receive from them. Here I'm trying to say that despite all the shortfalls of the golden rule, it has a great advantage that it seems to really be the hard bottom line of each moral stance that you find reciprocity seems to be really an omnipresent characteristic of each moral stance, independently of the culture or the tradition that you enter. That's why is represented at the United Nations as sort of ultimate moral law on which everybody agrees. So it's the dimension of impartiality and fairness, and reciprocity that constitute the gist of duty, and I think we find that also in the moral law, in the golden rules. So just to sum up, where are we? Okay, I'm saying that the first distinction between Kant's account of human dignity and mine is that I want to detach our ability to follow the moral law from the idea that this moral law has to come in one of the formulations of the category of imperative. When I wrote this book, I thought that the flexibility had to be constrained because, okay, maybe you don't follow the category of imperative, you follow the golden rule, that is not exactly the same thing, but that's okay as well. But there have to be limit to the kind of moral law that you're following. Right now, I'm prepared to say that it's not so much the specific content of the moral law that you're following that is important, it's the categorical nature of the way in which the moral law or rule appeals to you. So, even if you do it for the sake of Hitler, and by doing so you sacrifice your life, I think that there is room for saying that this kind of agency reveals you as an autonomous person, maybe not as a very intelligent one or a wise person, but that doesn't matter because intelligence and wisdom is not what is at stake, and therefore even if we capture the Nazi official, we still want to treat him in a certain way. We can kill him, that's what the Nuremberg trial did, but we cannot treat him as an animal, or we cannot treat him in a degrading way. Why? Because he still is a human person. He's still capable of acting on principle. Yes?
This kind of acting based on principle is not the original sense of formalism, of moral formalism, Kantian moral formalism.
Yeah, very good question. So the moral law does not need to have a content, but it's only the form. Yeah, except that I've never been convinced that you really get to the categorical imperative by simply passing the universality test. Because I don't think that the formula of humanity is equivalent to the formula of the universalization of the maxim. That's why I know that there is this argument in Kant that it is only the form of the maxim that is going to be relevant. You have to universalize the rule of action that you are appealing. If it
as not, for example, the formula of universality of law, the same value of the golden rule. It depends of what you think that universal plausibility is.
So you are suggesting that it is the same of the golden rule, or it is not?
It is closed, and yeah, because you can think. I can accept something that is normally steel, for example, and if this universality, I think it's possible of universally, you can accept that.
Right.
I think that universality, the formula of universality, has the same problem in sense that you you
Oh, so
appointed.
you were saying the same problems I was highlighting about the
Yes,
golden rule, also
yes.
the
Mhm.
mere universality of
Yes.
the maxim
Mhm.
Kant has. Yeah, I think so too. That's why I think
Mhm.
that universality is not the same as the formula of humanity,
Yes.
which is a,
No, I
you know,
agree. I
a
agree.
stronger,
Uh-huh.
and clearer
Uh-huh.
moral constraint.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and I think that this kind of fidelity of principle, independent from the nature of principle, I ever think that is what formality means
Right.
in Kant, but I don't know if we can discuss. Only one thing. Are you all, have you familiarity with this principle, with Kantian universality principle? And
No, I think I need to think more about it. I think I'm only saying that I am defending the formality here, or the reciprocity, or the, you know, I'm saying that I'm trying to construe a notion of autonomy in which you are autonomous simply when you act on a principle that in certain specific circumstances, the circumstances that we are assuming, call on silencing all your inclinations and egoistic drives. It is a different question whether the law that you are respecting ultimately is a good one. So, I mean, mob rule, again, I mean, if you accept violence as a way of solving controversies, then I guess that it depends on how you receive the act of violence that your enemy is doing. If, so to speak, if you try to make the argument, oh no, that's very bad on you to use violence against me, and now simply because now it's your turn to receive violence, that doesn't sound like an autonomous act. If you sort of die saying, okay, that was what, you know, the rule that I wanted to begin with, now it's my turn to suffer the consequences. This shows that, you know, again, you are an autonomous person. You are thinking about your life in a way that displays distance from egoism, or, you know, submission to your passion and inclinations. And I guess that the gist, that's the most important, the deepest layer of autonomy, the one that really everybody can have, quite independently of the specific morality he or she subscribes to. And of course that's good news, because we want to have an account of dignity that is as broad as possible. We cannot come up with an account of human dignity that only Kantians can accept. So in order to buy into this account of human dignity, you have to be convinced of the categorical imperative of Kant's ethics or stuff like that, because otherwise we know that not everybody agrees with Kant's ethics. Even nice people like Humians, Aristotelians, not necessarily Nazi officials or mobsters. So, okay, what I try to do later on